Welcome, everyone. Today is November 24th, and then this is another installment of SIG Apps bi-weekly call. My name is Maciej, and I'm joined by Janet and Ken. Uh, and quick announcements. Cube is planned to be released so far on schedule on December 17th. The upcoming freeze that we have is mid next week, which is the December 2nd, sorry, and that's a docs freeze. Um, I've included the link to the full schedule if you're interested in. Uh, if you get pinged by one of the SIG release folks about requiring to help or unblock them um, working through any potential flakes that might be happening in the pipeline, please make sure to prioritize their requests promptly. And with that, we can move over to the first topic. And that will be a discussion that Heba and we've had past KubeCon, but we've been also working and discussing this topic a couple of times during our previous calls, and that's about stateful sets and whether we want to introduce something like an ability to recover from a broken stateful set and a rolling update, or whether we want to address this by introducing entirely new recreate strategy. Um, I don't know, Heba, do you want to add something to what we've been talking so far? Um, a
Uh,
quick basic, yeah, go ahead.
no, I believe you have all the context already, so please go ahead. Yes.
Right. So, all the information and the entire discussion that has been happening is basically around those two topics, whether we want to introduce some kind of customization policy for how we want to recover um, a broken rolling update, whether that's broken intentionally or not, whatever was the reason. And the two main paths that we were considering when going through this particular enhancement was basically either we're going to introduce something similar to what deployment has, which is a progress deadline seconds, which would further complicate um, the stateful set controller, but it would allow a user to define, oh, if your stateful set is not working within whatever the time are you gonna set, we will try to just force delete it and recreate it. And that would help resolving some of the intermittent issues like networking, image pulls, or something that is temporary. Because if it's a permanent issue, then even recreate will not help in that case. Or whether we want to introduce entirely new recreate strategy, which, as Ken pointed out in one of our previous calls, it was discussed early on in the stateful sets inception, but because there were no clear use cases back then yet, immediate at least, we've agreed that we are going to punt it until some later point in time. Um, And looking through both of those cases, each of those has ups and downs. For Recreate, the definite benefit will be that the controller logic will be significantly simpler because the way we are handling this, it'll be entirely new update policy within a stateful set controller, and we will be able to provide users with a little bit more flexibility. On the other hand, if we would go with progress deadline seconds, then that's just a modification to an existing controller, which already is somewhat complicated and it will require additional work and including some of the existing constraints that we already built over the past years into the stateful set controller. Um, Wojtek, Heba, and myself, we discussed this in pretty depth in the CAP and also 2 weeks ago in Atlanta. And based on all the discussion that we've had, we are leaning towards to just go with the recreate policy. One reason is that it'll be easier to implement. I remember that Heba had a couple of questions whether we are planning to implement things like max unavailable, which is happening in parallel, and we just promoted it to beta, or other things that are available in the rolling policy for a stateful sets. And I believe we are going to approach this topic in a similar manner as we did with the rolling policy. We will start with just the simplest case. Even if you look at the deployment policy, which also has a recreate and a rolling update policy, the recreate is pretty bare and doesn't include too many tweaks. And I believe that that will be the simplest approach going forward. And if anyone of you have any questions, suggestions, proposals, or concerns that we might not necessarily be considering, feel free to let us know now, or potentially you can leave a comment in the enhancements. We link the enhancement in the notes. I have it also open in the on my screen currently. Philip, go ahead.
Yeah, so firstly, like deleting or terminating pods according like to the readiness signal seems quite problematic and disruptive because like the readiness or the ready condition like was not meant to be used in this way. And like the applications mm, might not expect that, and and you can get like to many corner cases like when you have a flipping ready condition or yeah. And I guess like if you would like to include it uh in the rollout, like then yeah, like the progress deadline sequence in the deployment doesn't work that way as well, like that we do not basically we do not like terminate the pods ourselves in this scenario when the deadline is reached. So, and like I don't know even how this would work out, for example, with the persistence volume claim retention policy. And like if like even like if this is like an opt-in behavior, like this could result in quite significant disruptions in the controller and yeah, in the current state of sets.
Right. That was one of the reasons why we were basically because the progress deadline seconds that are available in deployments are basically still managing the replica set. So it's easier to roll out or go back in history to previous versions. Whereas with stateful sets, we don't have an intermediate objects. Stateful sets directly control pods, in which case it's a little bit more challenging how we would react to any kind of disruptions coming from there.
Mhm.
So
And
yeah,
like and have you considered as I was looking at this issue, like the main problem to me, it seems that like when we create a new rollout and like the last pod is not ready, then we cannot proceed with such rollout. So
it
like
doesn't. Uh-huh, go ahead. Sorry.
yeah, so like would it make sense like to try to solve this like corner case first? Like to me there seems like some parallel like to what we did like in the disruption budget with the unhealthy motivation policy. So like basically if you have in some scenario you have unhealthy or not ready pods, then you could opt in into some mm, like more like or some more advanced disruption. So in this case it would be like if we see a new image and we would say like the last pod is not ready, we could like preempt that one.
The conditions for deciding whether a particular pod is healthy or not, that, as you nicely pointed out, is not sufficient information that for us to be able to say, oh, we should continue the rollout because we're not fully aware of the intentions of the user. We can only speculate on what is defined in the spec.
Yeah,
And
yeah, yeah.
if
I only
a
meant.
mid-step is
Yep. Sorry.
required or not, which we have that ability with deployments going through replica set, but because we're directly managing mm, the pods, we don't have that flexibility to be able to roll out to a previous version or do anything similar to that kind of like managing the rollout of the application. We have to say, oh yeah, we have to decide whether this pod is successful and we can continue with the rollout, or whether it's failed and all the conditions that we've built around the controller basically allow us to say you're in the unrecoverable state and I would prefer you manually fix the situation.
Yeah, I just meant like if we like to, because like we still like have some possibility of tracking that, so we can see like if a pod has a new revision, right? So like we can see like if we want to replace it with like the old revision with a new revision, and like we could have like a opt-in like policy in the stateful set that would just
We
solve
don't
this
actually
case.
do automatic rollback in deployment right now, right? Like we still haven't implemented that. We just still stall at a failed with after you exceed progressing deadline sentence, you have to automate the rollback there. So like for stateful set to do something different would be a first, which I guess I'm not opposed to, but I would say like my 2 cents would be recreate. Not only is it simpler, it has a direct parallel with the other controllers. Go ahead, Philip.
Yeah, I didn't mean implementing a rollback, and yeah, we don't have automatic one in deployments. So I meant like if there is like a new revision, so basically there is an action from the user to overwrite like the stateful set with a new one, and then we would uh, like basically recreate the pod with the new
So,
revision.
so you mean that we will just do the rolling update, or like recreate it, whatever, only if the client or only if the user has another version from the stateful set?
Yeah, I think I'm basing this on like on that issue. That's I would have to find it, but they basically the like the complaint was that like if even if you like recreate or like apply a new stateful set, you will not get any resolution.
What if this is a pipeline and the pipeline will just like deploy the stateful set update once, and it will fail if like after sometimes it didn't get the correct state or to the desired state.
Yeah,
How
so I
can
was yeah
yeah.
this would not solve that. I was basically trying to only tackle this scenario when you have like a user basically telling us what to do. So like with the pipeline, we would have to like evaluate the ready signal, which as we said is
Yeah, actually,
quite difficult.
this is one of the use cases that I mentioned in the KIP, because this was a heavily required, not required, but like an ask from the community. We have a pipeline; it keeps failing because the stateful set cannot be updated. So I think we need to handle both. Either like having actually, I like this if we have like a new new like new update from the user. This is a good sign for us, but at least we need to just think about the pipeline or the automated path as well.
And so please tell me how would what's the signal of like running the recreate in the pipeline?
For the only thing I was able to introduce here is some sort of it's basically like a timeout, which is the progress deadline in seconds. So after like I will keep retrying it a couple of times until this deadline is
Okay, and
timeout.
this would be introduced to the stateful set controller, or
Yeah, to the stateful set.
Okay, but isn't this better to be implemented by like an external one?
Yeah, I was going to say,
External
what if
control.
just like with recreate the, as we have it instead of deployment, right? It's like, cool. Instead of trying to update anything in place, I'm just going to delete all the existing pods and roll out from scratch. If you externalize that as direct intent in terms of like I have a recreate update strategy in stateful set that's equivalent to a deployment, not necessarily an orchestrator that runs in Kubernetes, though it might, but when you rerun your pipeline, you have a higher probability of success. Like any failure that was persisted due to a bad state in the last run, at a minimum, you'll be starting over with a clean state, which seems to me to be the behavior that most people would probably want when you're running in a pipeline, right? Like you want to try to get a fresh state, new software, new pod spec. So I mean, to me, that in terms of like level of effort, parity with the existing APIs, and converging towards a common set of solutions across the API surface seems like the sweet spot, but open to feedback. More importantly, I want to hear what other people think.
Yeah,
Okay,
because
I didn't.
the
Yeah,
more
go
we
ahead.
talk, the more we're leaning toward recreate. Like all of us, like going there. So I would love if we have like like the opposite side, someone trying just to like say no, this is wrong for 1, 2, 3 reason. But yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, I think I agree with like, and I think like adding like an automatic recreate, like this could like bite us in the future, like especially like with all the features we have in the stateful set controller and how they all interact with each other. I mean, especially like the PVCs.
Well,
So
I'm not opposed. Like, I think if we're going to add like a progress deadline seconds, then before we did anything with recreate, I would want to get it to what it does with deployment today, which reports like a failed update via a condition, right? Like bring it to parity with the existing API surface. And then if we're going to take a chunk out of like internalizing automatic rollback, then I would start with deployment first because there's no storage associated with it. And I would get it right there and make sure it's very robust. And then I would add the automatic rollout to like, I don't know, either daemon set or stateful set next, because either one of those is like risky. Like it's a little scary, like automatically rolling back administrative tasks that potentially provision critical resources on the node. But like if we get it right with deployment, I'm amenable to that. And then stateful set because of the storage, different type of risk, but also very risky. I'd still my 2 cents would be like, let's get it right with deployment if we're gonna do auto rollback, and then figure out how we do it for more complicated workloads where the risks of the customer is higher.
Cool. I don't think we're gonna get extra information from folks supporting the progress deadline seconds. The cap is out there. Um, we would like to pursue that for 136, given that we already started working on it and it has been in discussions for roughly 3 months, give or so. Um, so we're hoping to get it to completion early 2026 so that it's ready for 136 when it starts sometime early January next year. We have 2 additional topics uh, that I would like to make room for. One will be from Marcus. Marcus, do you want to share your screen?
Sure, yeah.
Okay, I'm gonna make you a co-host and I'm gonna stop sharing and you should be able to share your screen.
All right. Um, yeah, this shouldn't take too long. I just have this cap ready. I think I showed everyone this a few weeks ago, but the last meeting was canceled. But this is ready for review. This is PDBs for multi-pod replicas using the workload API. Um, As just an overview, it's for letting pod disruption budgets count multi-pod replicas instead of individual pods for the amount of disruption being calculated, um, which would be useful for when you have like a grouping of pods where you don't want any one of them to be disrupted. Yeah, I guess just it would be good if some people could take a look at this and let me know what they think. I started on the implementation, sort of assuming that this probably won't have too many issues or require much change because it's using the workload API, which already has some fields that are kind of implemented that would help with this. So, yeah, thanks.
When I was going through this document, the biggest one that I was looking at was specifically the API surface for how can you define a particular pod is part of a group, a specified group in the workload, because workload API allows you to define those groups, and based on the docs that they've included for what the future were basically what the future evolution of that API will look like. They are planning to introduce several um, complicated layers for how to define those groups. I'm trying to figure out how we could ensure that whatever happens within the workload API, we don't have to expand the API surface in any way. So the first thing that I was thinking, I will admit that I haven't read through your enhancement yet, but I was thinking that rather than specifying a Boolean that says, oh, use pod group, I still need to have an explicit information about use this workload API to learn about the shape of the group. And then from within that, we'll have to figure out where or how we can share some of the code that currently lives inside of the scheduler, if I remember correctly,
Yeah.
that is capable of parsing the workload resource and getting all of that information, and then be that part of the eviction logic, because that's the only reasonable way for us to be able to define, oh yeah, that I'm part of the group. I cannot evict that particular pod, or I can only evict this many.
Okay, so you think it should specify the part of the workload API that it's using instead of just being a Boolean in case there's like other future ways to define pod groups?
I believe so. I'm not 100% sure. Like I said, I'm fully aware that the workload API will be affecting uh, the controllers. I was actually talking with Janet um, a couple weeks back, the future, and same with Heba and Wojtek, how the workload API will affect the controllers. And I was kind of alluding that probably the PDB will be the first one where we will see the most use, because I don't know if you were aware, but a couple weeks back, it was Heba who actually brought up the topic of including the workload uh, name inside of the job API. And that was the part where we said we're currently, for at least that was in 135, we were having a hard time figuring out why something like that would be beneficial if we already have that information about which part um, how the pod is included in as part of any particular workload resource, given that the workload information is embedded in the pod template. It's a part of the pod
Yeah.
spec, basically. But because we're talking about the PDB, the question remains how we should be doing that correctly. Because we cannot rely on the group information being part of the pod, because if you're specifying your app, you're defining your application, we don't cross-reference your app as being part of this, I don't know, deployment or whatever else. We usually encompass a group of pods through label selectors, um, which can but doesn't have to be part of a particular group of pods being part of the workload. The question would be, should we have the workload resource name? Maybe. I'm not 100% sure. That part of the API is the part where I'm a little bit confused, and that's the part that I'm going to be most most carefully looking at how we can think through the logic and ensure that we infer the right shape of the group. I mean, I'm talking a lot of things because I don't have a full picture in my head yet how this should be working, but I'm pretty convinced that this is something that we will have to look at sooner or later.
I mean, for sure. Like the pod disruption budget, the logic is kind of interesting, right? Because after we added controller ref, what we started doing was we actually got the intended replicas directly from the controller, which was the controller of the pod. And that's why it works for deployment, stateful set, well, for replica set, but stateful set, so on. Now, for workload, there's like the place where we would get that is not as clear, right? So like, um, like the original intention was everything should just be labels, right? Like you have this bunch of pods that are all selected by label. And like we're just so far away from that now that
Mhm.
it gets tricky. Like I think about what would be ideal is if like there was something you could do to specify an arbitrary like thing that implements a scale sub resource that could be a built-in type or not, that could be referenced by the disruption controller, so that when we do that loop inside of the sync, you could just go back and look at the scale to get the intended number of replicas directly for anything that implements a scale sub resource. Um, and then potentially you could associate that with the workload so you could get like the intended number of pods, right? So you, like to make the code more generic and like cleaner. Um, but yeah, I have to go back. I haven't looked at the PDB code in a while. I have to go back and look at it to see what's like actually even feasible there. Philip?
Yeah, I agree. Like that, like we should have like a good mapping of features of the workload, like to the PDBs. Like especially because in the workload, like you are defining like a structure of pods, so you have like groups of pods, and you might want to disrupt only like some subset of these pods, and like we need to know how to define that and reference that, and like we can also look at like current PDB issues that we would like to maybe avoid. So one of them is like if we have like people want to define overlapping PDBs. So what happens like if people like create two PDBs for the same workload, but maybe reference like a subset of pods, and like how do we ensure that the pods are not overlapping? Because like we do not support currently, or how do we want to support like overlapping PDBs and overlapping like workload pods? And yeah, so that's one.
So I checked the PDB code. It uses the scale sub resource to figure out the number of replicas for the workload.
only pulling up the built-in, like it's only doing that if the pod has a controller that's associated with the built-in type, right? Or no? Am I wrong?
I think it uses the sub resource, so potentially work with other types of.
Okay.
Yeah,
Um, Only for some, I believe, because there was a time when we implemented the scale sub resource for a job, but because it was not fully logically consistent with other controllers, there was a point I believe we dropped the scale sub resource from a job. I'm not 100% sure. And there's also the controller is one side, but then there's also the eviction logic, which affects how we look at the PDB and how that part um, decides whether we're allowing or not a particular eviction to happen. Yeah, go ahead, Philip.
yeah. The scale sub resource, I think like is only like a number of replicas. So like if you want to target some group of pods, then like there will have to be a change to the scale sub resource, and that's difficult. And yeah, it's also like not all workloads implement that. Like you can do it as a CRD. And one of the issues is also so we have discussed. I remember like adding support for jobs, which we did not do yet for like some reasons that we might not want to block the nodes for like transient workloads, even though these days like the job workloads are getting more important and maybe one don't want to get disrupted, but that's the other thing. But with the workload resource, we would basically support like job pods in this such scenario, since we want to have like workload support in job API.
So yeah, I believe what we're all trying to say is that this will require a little bit more scrutiny so that the API surface is sound because I believe that's the biggest challenge for this particular part. None of us is saying that this is not a thing that we want to do. It's
That's
just
the
like
thing that we have to do basically. Like we're going to have to figure this out in order to make the workloads API successful. Like that's not,
exactly.
but we have to be.
Yeah, correct. Yeah, I believe what Heva is talking have dedicated meaning for the workload API integration with other APIs. Very likely at some point in time. The question is basically when. For
Yeah.
now, I want to know the use cases for the rest of the APIs. Because for me, the current shape of, oh, it's part of the pod spec and all the controllers that we currently own are basically capable of expressing, oh, I'm part of a workload is there. I haven't seen a use case yet where I would be defining a different workload membership in a given job deployment or whichever controller you're talking about. So I think that's a
I
little bit further down the line. With PDB, I think that will be the first one that we will have to tackle that particular bit.
Yep. And I believe that we will need to have like I don't know if it's a KEP or a document, like somewhere to have the workload API and like what like everything like BBD, like right now, how we will interact with this, what, like workload API can handle this. Do we need to add anything to any other API? It's like a study, like it's like some sort of white paper. I don't know, but I believe SIG apps should work on this, and I'm happy to be part of this study paper, like effort, something like that.
Yep, that makes sense. So, Marcus, expect that We will remember about your cap. Can't remember when, but I'll try to look at it in the upcoming weeks and leave some comments about the shape. Be prepared that the API surface will be taking the most time. It would be great to also ensure that the people who authored the original workload API were also involved in that so that we can hear their opinions. I don't know if you're working closely with them on this particular topic, but we'll definitely have to pull them in as well.
Sounds good. Thanks.
Thank you very much. And the last topic is from Philip about stateful set availability checks. Philip, do you want to share your screen or is it fine just for me
Yeah,
to?
yeah, no need. So yeah, I just want to quickly bring this up. So like we did a small fix in replica sets. I don't know, it was the last release. Like basically to better calculate the availability checks and not have a delay in some like weird scenarios. So I was thinking like if we could maybe since we are like bumping like max unavailable to beta this release, I was wondering like if we could introduce this bug fix to stateful sets also in 135.
Mm, I believe that at this point in time in the release, I mean, we can review the fix as is. But at this point in time in the release, I would probably punt it over to 136. They released the beta this past Wednesday. So the release team will be very hesitant on fixing any bugs other than critical issues destroying data. And I would probably recommend to hold on, land it in 136. We can always backport this into the first patch release for 135. Uh, but I wouldn't want to rush this thing to be included in 135. I don't know what's the timeline for 135. If there is a second beta planned. No, there's only one beta. That was last Wednesday, and the next Tuesday will be RC. So I don't want to interrupt in any way their release. Let's let 135 land as is, and we can land it early one in 136 and then backport it to 135 is if required. I'll make some room to have a look at this particular fix this week.
Okay, yeah, sounds good. Yeah, I still need to add the tests, but yeah, that should not be that difficult since like we did that already for the replica sets. And
I think I remember the PR.
yeah, and we can decide later, like if we want to backport it. Yeah, thanks. It's on your radar.
Yeah, I'm actually looking at the PR right now. It looks good, but like you said, you need to add some tests to actually check for the condition. But all the existing tests have been updated and you plumb the clock through. So, and it's fairly straightforward relative to the referenced implementation that was contributed previously. So looks but I concur, like, do we need to push this through for this release? That doesn't seem super clear to me, but like we should take it for sure.
Okay, cool. Yeah, I was just like mentioning because of the max unavailable. Like we've had like this bug in replica sets for a long time, but since like this feature is just getting promoted, it might be surprising to some users, but it's not like a critical fix, I guess. So like we can postpone it. Thanks.
Cool. I believe with that, we are able to conclude our meeting today. Thank you very much all for discussions and see you next time.
Thanks
Bye,
all.
folks.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.